Hey everyone, I'm Jay Shear, and you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. This is where remarkable people gather to share insights, lift and inspire, and deliver actionable content. Nelson Mandela said, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." On this episode, we're going to be talking about grit, resilience, leadership, self-discovery, and building a life to be proud of against the odds. Our guest is a motivational and keynote speaker, an inspiring and charismatic storyteller, an entrepreneur, a leadership mentor, and small business consultant who helps companies grow, scale, and sustain. He earned his Juris Doctorate from Columbia Law School and spent over 25 years in various public, nonprofit, and private sector leadership roles before starting his entrepreneurial journey. Please welcome the principal of Scott Mason LLC and the host of the recently launched Purpose Highway podcast, Scott Mason. Scott, welcome.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Well, I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm looking forward to the conversation. So let's dive right in, Scott. So many times we self-identify with our work or a title versus who we truly are. So Let's start with who you are. And if you could provide a thumbnail sketch of your journey and what led you to living your life's purpose.
Yeah. Wow. An amazing question. So I am someone who really is motivated and excited by the process of creating spaces that enable people to connect to their higher purpose so that they can build a better self and then a better world from there. And that may be by providing them with, mentoring or coaching with regards to leadership and management, or just being able to be exactly what you say I do out there, providing speaking, motivation, or other sorts of opportunities and spaces for people to really jump out of whatever shell they're in, overcome whatever obstacles they're in, learn from my own lessons, and build a better life. As you mentioned earlier, I was an attorney I still am an attorney technically, but I was a practicing attorney for a quarter of a century and had various other executive and managerial roles. I had a lot of those roles, took on a lot of those jobs, not because I had any connection with who I am or what I really needed to be, but because that was what gave me the external validation that I thought I needed, or what enabled me to meet external expectations that whoever they were out in the world, had set for me. It really wasn't until a series of incidents occurred, including really some negative consequences of having my dream come true to reach a certain level in the executive large organizational world, as well as having to feel what I call almost a providential pull away from that, accepting it and begin to move towards what I really believe I was meant to be, that the journey that I had began to really get clarity and really began to be awesome, as well as to change my mindset about not reaching for what I thought anyone else wanted, how I could be of service to others.
Yeah, that's an interesting journey that has no doubt quite a few twists and turns along the way. So if you could we go back just a bit and share a bit about your backstory? Take us back to where you started.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I was born in London, England. I was the child of a woman that was in graduate school and had an affair with a man that was in law school. And that was, they were of different races. And between being an illegitimate child and a child that was biracial in a place and time when that was really not acceptable, I was put up for adoption quite quickly, adopted by African Americans here in the United States, who in turn moved to the rural Midwest. And the best way to describe growing up to me, is how I spent my time when I wasn't in school. I remember I'd go out a lot and go running in wheat fields 5-7 miles a day. Or I'd go to the creek that I was behind my house and I'd find crawdads and turtles to play with. But at night, I would look up at the stars and I would imagine that there would be so much more. Because I view Kansas as very limited, particularly for someone like me that was from an unusual background that clearly didn't fit in the social milieu that I was raised in, and really was an environment where expectations generally were not high for people, but they certainly were not high for me. So with a lot of hard work and probably even more good luck, I ended up eventually coming here to New York City for law school. As you mentioned earlier, I remember setting foot in Manhattan for the very first time, coming out of Grand Central, seeing the cars and the trucks and the cabs and all the people. I took a bus to go up to Harlem, where I was staying with a friend of mine from college, to orient me to the city. And I knew that this is where I was going to be for the rest of my life. But nevertheless, my family was working class. My father worked for the State Highway Patrol. My mother worked for a dog food factory. When I went to Columbia Law School, didn't meet other people like me. They just were not there. And so acclimating to that environment, acclimating to New York City itself, acclimating to law, growing up in an environment where intellectualism was something that was actively discouraged, where being smart was what got you beat up, and having ambition that was beyond what most of my colleagues coming up could even imagine, was a big adjustment at a time where there were not still, a lot of opportunities for, again, people that did not fit within certain boxes. And so a lot of my journey has been trying to figure out exactly where and how I could find that path, and then dealing with, even in, a governmental context within a major metropolis like New York City, folks who did not want me to succeed, did not believe people like me should succeed, and were more than happy to make that clear.
Can you give an example so we have a better understanding of what that looked like and what that felt like?
Sure. I mean, the most dramatic example was a commissioner that I worked for. A commissioner, for those who might not be aware of government hierarchies, that's the head of a government agency. And I worked for a social service agency that had oversight over about 350 senior programs. And I reported directly to the agency head. And she had an initiative that she wanted to roll out. And she ran it by her senior staff. There were some problems with it. Now, it wasn't that we were against her or the idea itself, but there were legal, administrative, and political problems with it. And so the key people that reported to her felt that I probably would be the one best positioned to articulate what those issues were to her. So I was elected the privilege of doing that. And I was brought with my staff and with my colleagues into her office to talk about it. And her response, Jay, was, I think, unforgettable. Scott, every time you come in here to talk to me, whenever I hear you talk, you sound so stupid that if I were you, I'd get a gun, put it in my mouth, and just shoot. As you can imagine, that's a very challenging thing to hear before your colleagues and your staff. That was a pretty clear statement as to what she thought about my intellectual abilities, and she made other private similar remarks to that effect. Wow. And that's one of those things where, it was something I had to learn to deal with, because it wasn't personal to me. That was a standard of treatment that existed across the board in that organization in various different ways and capacities. But it sent a message as to whether you, as an individual, and certain people were hit by this more than others, were really welcome as full participants and fully able to bring every gift that you had to the table to the service of the public And that was a public here in New York City that is the most diverse imaginable.
So how do you process a situation like that? How do you work through a situation like that and continue to move forward so you can achieve not only the goals of the organization, but your own goals as well?
Yeah. In that particular instance, in the moment, I just laughed it off. I knew I couldn't break down. I knew I couldn't throw a hissy fit and a temper tantrum right then and there. I knew I had to put food on the table and think about my next step. But, actually, a couple of years earlier, I got the most important piece of advice I've ever received in my life that helped me make it through that, and has been the one theme that, if anything, has helped me be professionally and skills-based resilient, more so than anything else anyone ever told me. In large organizations across the board, as I'm sure you know, one way to advance is to get a mentor. And that mentor will spend a lot of time with you, and they will work with you, they'll coach you, they will also funnel opportunities your way and recommend, sometimes even make these opportunities happen. And so in government, that's no different than any other large organization. And many times during the 20 or so years that I was working with government, I would see that happen to colleagues around me. So-and-so, she's his person, and she would, suddenly get promotion after promotion after promotion. And I remember talking to a boss of mine one time, feeling very frustrated about that. I felt that there were a number of different reasons that were that this was happening. It was unfair, but life is unfair. But I just wanted to gripe about it. How come I can't get a mentor? I said. And he looked at me and said something I will never forget as long as I live. He said, "Scott, you will never have a mentor. It won't happen for you. I'm sorry to tell you, but that's the truth." I later found out that what he meant was that there were certain things about my presentation style that did not really encourage that. And some things about me as a person. I presented confidently. I had a very large presence, so people might not necessarily have thought that I needed help. Or, I'm LGBT. And a lot of people view their mentees almost as sons or daughters. And at that time, not a lot of people really wanted to view the gay guy as their son. But in any event, the reasons for that perhaps will never be fully explained, even though I got some explanation about it later.
Okay.
One thing that he said next was what made the difference. "Scott, if you're not going to get a mentor, you need to be your own mentor. You need to commit yourself to mentoring yourself every bit as much as you want people to mentor you." And Jay, that changed everything in my life. Literally to this day, I view myself as a mentor. Back then, I started to put together a curriculum of reading that I needed to do right after that, to learn how to lead, to learn how to manage, to identify. I still keep that curriculum to this day. Other people may or may not ever be there for me, but I know Scott Mason will be there for me, and Scott Mason will care about me. I had to turn over control of that function to myself. Best decision I ever made, best advice I ever received. Seriously.
Amazing. So knowing that anyone can be mentored.
Yes.
If we're willing to ask, and if we're open to seeking that guidance, that help, and that feedback, did you ultimately connect with mentors and coaches that could also help supplement the work that you were doing yourself to help guide your way?
Much later in life, in that organization, no, it did not happen. And to some extent, I also worked in the nonprofit sector after that. That didn't happen there. However, there was a period of time between government service and nonprofit service when I began to do consulting work for small business owners. That was a natural constituency for me because I had an understanding of leadership management and how to scale organizations, even if they were within huge organizations like the City of New York government. And the very first client that I had was someone who had actually started out with a martial arts school. He slept on the mat of his dojo and cleaned himself in the bathroom of that dojo for a couple of years before it was successful enough to really build up. And then he gradually built that school into an empire of five martial arts schools that are very successful, groundbreaking in a lot of ways. And he pulled me in to do some consulting work with him. But what he also did was more valuable than that. He mentored me on how to be an entrepreneur, how to be a leader in a different sort of way than I had imagined before, how to apply my resilient skills in a situation that I had never encountered or even imagined for myself. And that relationship, that concern someone showed for me, actually changed the path of my life forever.
Interesting. Well, let's unpack that a bit then. So what were some of the leadership skills, characteristics that you learned in the dojo from this sensei?
The big one was self-accountability. He was self-accountable whenever he could be. In the organizations that I had worked for, the culture was quite the opposite of self-accountability. There tended to be a culture of blame. And looking back on it, so much of my time was spent protecting myself from blame, making sure that no matter what happened, I was going to be okay. I look back on the amount of time and energy that was wasted there, where I could have simply, or the culture itself could have encouraged people to be self-accountable, and so many things could have moved forward. The dojo itself, one of the things that was part of my compensation package was the ability to train for free at the dojos. I was a very poor student, and that my natural ability was bottom of the rung. I would walk in the dojo, I'd be paired with someone, Jay, you could see their faces just drop. They were so sad they were going to have to endure training with Scott Mason. I wouldn't have wanted to train with me. It was horrible. But one of the things I learned was that I could not blame anyone for my failures or my lack of learning but myself. The instruction was, by any objective measure, excellent. I just couldn't do it. I wasn't putting enough into it. My learning curve was just slow. I wasn't paying enough attention, all of those sorts of things. That was a real life metaphor for accountability. And sort of tying that into the theme of being your own mentor, which is in a way taking accountability for your own learning and growth too, it really began to take me down a road of a changed mindset. If I can be accountable for how I learn in the dojo, maybe I can be accountable for how I deal with others in business. Maybe I can be accountable for the outcomes that I have. And maybe instead of being obsessed with avoiding blame, I can even lean into it and be someone that dives into change, dives into risk, saying I'm ready to hold myself accountable and own whatever happens. Transformative. It's transformative.
Yeah, that's powerful. It truly is. And I can I can feel your pain there a bit being on the mats. I also went through a similar experience and trained for approximately 3 years. But one thing that you absolutely learn is that resiliency, right? Always picking yourself back up and respecting the energy, respecting the person that is across from you, and working with that energy.
Yeah.
So it's that's very interesting. And since you mentioned mindset, I have to ask you, how does mindset play a role in your life and in your business?
Mm-hmm. I would argue that mindset is the most important tool that we have in all of our arsenal. I consider entrepreneurship the ultimate heroic journey. I always compare growing and scaling a business as an entrepreneur to being a hero attempting to climb up to Mount Olympus, with those castles at the top of Mount Olympus, right? Like being the tower on a mountain that we all want our businesses to be out in the world. And in order to climb that mountain, Every hero has to believe that they can do it in the first place. They also have to know, once they embark on those journeys, that there are going to be monsters and obstacles and all sorts of things that are out to get them. They have to be prepared to fight. They have to be able to gather the forces around them to support them and to be able to battle these obstacles. But they have to still keep climbing and never forget about Olympus at the top. And then when they hit it, maybe they realize there's something even beyond Olympus. The heroic mindset, resilience, I am going to make it to that mission no matter what, is everything. And it gives you true power and fortitude once you have that a lot of folks that aren't in that situation probably can't even conceive.
So let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah.
How have you specifically been able to cultivate that type of champion's mindset, that ability to just continue to drive forward, have that belief system, and knowing, even though you may not have something tangible in front of you, but you've got the ability to see it and it empowers you to continue to forge ahead? Where does that come from for you?
I would say, off the top of my head, 2 immediate ways. Number one, trying to really understand what your mission is, what your purpose is, why you're here, and making sure that your business, or at least where you're driving your business, is aligned with that. Every hero has to know they're a hero, but they also have to understand where they're going, i.e. to Olympus, and why. In other words, there has to be an alignment between their self-perception as a hero and the place that they're going to and their vision for that, to be able to sustain it. If you don't even have that, then there's nothing but sand underneath your castle that you're building. And so you've got to be able to have that rock solid foundation. Now, there are, of course, times in which we all doubt that. And so the other thing that I think that's really important for that is understanding that we're all human. We can have a hero's mindset, but the hero isn't a hero unless she or he makes it through the very sorts of trials that you're talking about. Now, in the ancient myths, heroes never just up and did anything on their own. Usually they had gods or wise people surround them and give them gifts that they chose to use. And so I view the people that we surround ourselves with as the magical gods or goddesses that are helping us, support us on that journey, whether they're strategic partners, right? The finance people that you're working with that are working with you because they really believe in you, or the marketing people, or your friend or your spouse, or the one person who was your first customer who will be there with your company into the very end. Those are those magical gods and goddesses that are there helping bolster you on your journey. So understanding then that we also, have them, and that we need to have the humility to talk to them, have them remind us of what we can do, is every bit as important as having that vision and that alignment in the first place.
Yeah, I love that. Building community around you, having the strength of those individuals that can not only provide good feedback, help you identify where your blind spots are, but also coach and encourage and cheer you on, and ensure that you're reaching the finish line of whatever goals and objectives you've set for yourself.
Yeah. If you don't have that, then you really are alone. And, it's a cliche at this point, but one thing I think about the current crisis that we're in, it's exposed the true interconnectedness of us. So many people, when they finally are alone, it's not exactly what they thought it was. We truly are in this together. If for no other reason than in order to survive as an entrepreneur, you have to operate within a business ecosystem.
Very true. So let's talk about some of the work that you do with your clients, with your coaching clients. How do you help them achieve that clarity, the foundation for them to be able to build a sustainable and thriving, successful business? So what are some of the first steps that you would take?
The first things that I do with them is just talk to them about what their vision for their life is, what they want their life to look like? What is their vision for the company? And identify to the extent to which there are gaps. And that's, by the way, a multi-dimensional question that sometimes can take hours and hours and hours. What sort of financial objectives do you want to have? Why do you have this business in the first place? And what do you want it to be? And is that something that you're comfortable with? For instance, do you want the business to exist as purely an income generator that you give to your family, and you have, a pension or some other sort of retirement asset that you can use when you're older, so you don't have to eat dog food at age 80? Or is this business your retirement asset? And if so, what's your cash flow situation? What about the vision? What about the workload that you want? I recently was meeting with a prospect who said, look, I want my business to grow and scale, but not so much that I can't go on 4 trips to Europe a year. And I don't want to have to borrow any money to get there. So we needed to have a candid talk about, well, is there real alignment there? And if there's not alignment, what is it that you really want? The other thing, too, that I find with a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly at the level that they are at, in which they end up needing my services and in which we are a good business match, is that the subject matter expertise that they had got them to a certain level. But then they hit a threshold, because running a business in its entirety takes more usually than simply understanding the technical aspects of the product or service that you're producing or giving out into the world. And so a lot of also what I'm talking to them about and working with them on is understanding the full business continuum within which they operate. If, let's say, I used to work in the printing business. If someone came to us with an order and they wanted to have XYZ thing printed by XYZ date, the production needs or issues that we may have are not the only ones that are out there. What's the ROI on that job, particularly if it's something odd? What are the marketing opportunities associated with that? What are the HR implications, particularly if there's overtime and we may or may not have money in the budget to pay our staff that? What if there are a whole host of other things that all need to be bundled together? And the danger with pure subject matter expertise as the sole pillar upon which business is based is that the ability to step back and look at the whole, like I said, the whole continuum may not be there. And then there's enormous invisible risk to the ongoing prosperity of that business. That's a mindset shift. And it's a challenging one for a lot of people. But fortunately, most of them come to understand that if they can't begin to wrap their minds around it, they're forever going to just be stuck.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So let's talk about getting unstuck. And I think you hit on a very, very important piece, and that is perspective, right? And being able to work with someone who can truly pull the lens back a bit so you can see more holistically what the overall business looks like, all the different moving parts, and almost like a chessboard where you can start to see patterns and see 5-6 steps ahead and what are the ramifications of certain decisions. So let's talk about getting unstuck for a moment. So first, where would you, if there is a through line amongst businesses that get stuck that you've dealt with, where does that usually happen, and how can you help a business get unstuck?
I would say the common thread that I've seen has been lack of expertise in one particular specific subject matter, and that is leadership. At the end of the day, leadership is many things, but it is, if not at the top of the pile, very close to the top of the pile, the ability to make a decision in light of all of those things that you just mentioned and externals as well. But in order to do that, we each have to define ourselves as leaders. One thing that I really like to talk about with business owners is what their true place is in the larger economy, because sometimes that puts it into perspective. A lot of entrepreneurs have, particularly those that have had prior careers, walk into entrepreneurship in a mindset of, this is my new job. If you're a business owner, you don't have a job. You're actually part of the capital class in the larger economic system as opposed to the labor class. And I don't use that word class in a hierarchical sort of way. I'm not saying one is better than the other because they're both interdependent. But what you are and what your actions mean in the larger economic context and what your role is in the larger economic context is something that's very important to understand. As capital, you're responsible for helping cash flow throughout the entire economy. That's a massive responsibility. But all of us, if we are going to live in a capitalistic society, as entrepreneurs, have to understand that. The number two, we direct the flow of that cash by being responsible for the allocation of resources within our businesses as well as within the larger business environment that we're operating in. That's a totally different mindset. That's a totally different framework. And that's a totally different perspective about viewing the day-to-day than if you are labor, where what you are responsible for is executing a task that helps drive that allocation of capital or resources to further the goals of the capital class that you are producing for. And so in big picture, really understanding that, getting folks talking that through, making sure that they understand that, to me is a big first step to get them to really be able to step into the awesomeness of the responsibility that they have assumed by becoming entrepreneurs. And I mean awesomeness, by the way, in two ways. It's awesome because it's awesome, but it's awesome because it's massive. When we're entrepreneurs, right, we turn our back on our business. We're turning back on something far bigger than just us. It's not the same if you're just working in a job.
Good point. I want to go back to purpose for a moment because you brought that up. And then I mentioned in the intro about the launch of your new podcast, Purpose Highway. Yeah. So how has your purpose changed over the last several years? And what is your purpose today? And then how would you coach and advise someone who wants to find their purpose?
Yeah. So what I view or how my purpose has changed. Let me start there. Climbing the ladder, having authority, influence, a title, a great office, and lots of money. Being a success was my sole and only purpose for a long time. You know, I, for a while, was second in command of a government agency that brought in $100 million worth of tax revenue every year. When you have, and I had those things that I was making, especially as a government employee, a good salary. I had an office, that was jaw-dropping. I had people reporting. I had all of those things. But Jay, if I were to ask someone to paint a soul picture of me, what my soul photo or soul painting would be a clay shell full of rage and anger inside. Because I had everything that I wanted, but I was unhappy. I was not doing anything for me. Everything was just for someone else, executing policies I didn't necessarily agree with, putting up with stuff that I didn't care about, pushing for something that had no inner meaning. And the only way I was able to process that was internally through anger. My purpose now is really more centered towards making sure that anyone that I come in contact with and who works with me understands that, develops into the full leader that they have within them. And by the way, I think all of us are leaders in one way or another because all of our actions impact the lives of others, whether we like it or not. So we all have a responsibility as leaders that way. And then really thinking about how can that serve what you want to do with your business, what that business is serving in the outer world, and then what the outer world can be, with an understanding that there's no point in building up ourselves as leaders or bettering ourselves or finding our own purpose if we're not going to have any impact in the larger world. What's changed is that by connecting and understanding with my purpose, I feel hyper energized every day. The Scott Mason that you're seeing right now, I've been told can be a little bit, can be somewhat energetic and, and is all these other sorts of interesting words I'm sure you're thinking in the back of your mind somewhere, right? Was not the person that people experienced, a decade, 15 years ago, but that's because of that connection. And in terms of how I got to that purpose, the world is full of noise. I spent so many years filling my life with the work that I had and then play or something to completely turn me off, usually, endless episodes of Game of Thrones or something like that. And not that those things don't have value or their place in the world. I needed to know what happened at the end of that series after all those years watching it, just like everybody else. But I will say, time is less finite of a resource than many of us realize. And one of the things that I began to do when I decided I needed to really think about why I was on this earth and how I could direct my career towards that was find the time to use the tools that are out there, as many as possible, to focus on that, whether it was putting a journal together, whether it was meditating, whether it was using walks that I would do in Central Park every night to focus on going to retreats, putting my toes in as many tools as possible with that in mind and surrounding myself with people, getting their feedback about it. Then gradually it began to take shape. There's some low cost DIY things that I've done. I have not always had massive amounts of money in my bank account. So, one time I found a Motel 6 in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and did a week-long silent retreat that was across the street from Walmart so I could get some food. And I literally sat and I meditated and journaled all day for a week. Great. I uncovered things about myself I never imagined. I had plans for myself by the end of it that were just waiting in my mind to pop out. So understanding that the time that we spend is not, as I said, as finite as we think. We can find the time, realizing that various tools exist out there and being unafraid to throw yourself into as many as possible. Eventually some are going to stick, or maybe in aggregate they all are.
I would concur with you, just trying different things, throwing yourself into different situations, and trying to find out and discover not only what you're passionate about, because that's one part of it, but what fulfills you.
Totally.
Right? Where is that meaning coming from? And I love the fact that you figured out ways that you could have those experiences and without having to spend a tremendous amount of resources. It was taking the time, like having the silent retreat as one example, and going through that self-discovery process.
Yeah.
That's
and you
remarkable.
Well, you said something, by the way, that's really important, because you said that passion was part of it. I'll be honest with you, Jay. I am passionate about Donna Summer, but I'm not going to build a business around her. And I think that focus, right, it should be something that you care about, but understanding that whatever it is that your purpose might be, or whatever it is that's right for you to do, it might not totally, as you were sort of implying, overlap with your ultimate passion. I don't know that I would have imagined or even really wanted to be way back when doing what I am right now. But surrendering to what my purpose is has made my life exactly what you say, more fulfilling. I mean, I wake up every morning, get up, I flip my knees off the side of the bed and jump up and I'm moving. I wasn't that way for the overwhelming majority of my life. That's fulfillment, irrespective of what my cash flow is like.
Yeah, I feel you. I've been down a similar path before. And, Scott, it's interesting. It probably took until close to the age of 50 where I began to better understand what my true purpose was, what my calling is. It doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy what I was doing in my career in all the years leading up to that, But in terms of finding true fulfillment, in terms of, finding your sweet spot, that can, I people are blessed that are able to find that purpose early on. I think that is absolutely fantastic. And, for me, it's been a bit of a longer journey, but it when you're there, right? It's like you described.
Yes.
You just cannot wait,
Yeah.
right, to get out of bed. You can't wait to get out there and have that next phone call or work on that next project or serve that next client. It truly is an amazing feeling. So, I'm glad that we're talking about that. And I want to segue for just a moment to talk about your new podcast. So first of all, I love the name of it, Purpose Highway.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk about for a moment the genesis of that idea and who is that podcast geared for and what type of guests are you having?
Mm-hmm. So the genesis of the podcast, first of all, let me step back a step beyond a step. One of the most transformative events in my life occurred actually during a nighttime bicycle ride in Central Park, where I realized that I was given certain skills and talents, and I had been, people had given me feedback about those, and I didn't know exactly what to do with them. And one of them was the ability to sit down with people, create a connection with them, and get them to talk and really make it engaging and enjoyable. And people kept telling me, Scott, you should be doing a podcast. Scott, you should be doing a podcast. So one thing I've learned is if everyone keeps saying you do it, and if every sign in the universe keeps pointing you in a direction, well, maybe I should pay attention. And so I had it in the back of my mind for some time. And then as I began on this journey that sort of led to the career that I'm in now around self-discovery, I began to also think, what is the thing that I can speak to and that I can connect with people around that is connected, relates to my personal mission, but also I think would be as universal as possible to listeners and would really affect them emotionally, would allow them, as well as the guests, to, like you said earlier, really go for the gut, be honest, and create a connection within the community of people that were guests and listeners. And so literally, as my focus on what my own purpose was became more clear, the purpose of the podcast itself is almost like it was given to me. I literally just woke up one morning and I knew that that's what it was. It was easy. And so that to me goes as to what you're talking about, right? You and I have endured, a day or two past 21 to figure out what our purpose is. But when it's there, a lot of these things I find do just poof, pop out of the sky. The audience is anyone. Look, we have as our guests entrepreneurs or other thought leaders who are open and engaged and believe in, by the way, the idea of our true purpose ultimately driving our success in life. And again, this idea of us living within a larger social milieu and us having essentially a social compact around our obligation in the world. If you were born and you knew from day one that you were going to be the king of England, and that was just the way it was, and and your mother just so happened to be the queen, this probably isn't the right podcast for you. But if you're someone like you, Jay, who has been on a search and can relate to that search, or who may feel like a raft at sea, we're absolutely right for you, especially if you want to think about it. If you're someone who wants to just come home and turn off, we may not be right for you now, but that day may come when turning off doesn't feel that good anymore. And then our podcast and its guests are going to be there for you. And we hope we can be a North Star, giving you some direction as you move.
Fantastic. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm excited for you. And I certainly look forward to tuning in and hearing the great conversations that I know that you're going to have. So I want to kind of wind back for a moment to something you said toward the beginning of our conversation when you mentioned about becoming your own mentor and you started reading books, right? Surrounding yourself with information, learning, right? Figuring out how can I grow and become a better version of who I am.
Yep.
So what are 1 to 2 books that have significantly affected your outlook on life?
So I am bad at remembering the name of authors. I remember the content, but I do not remember who wrote half of these things. 3 stand out. 1 is a book called Just Listen, which is about the art of listening and navigating communication. Once you have a listening sort of mindset, as you can imagine, you learn a lot. Number 2, The Creative Curve, which is an analysis of in what context creativity occurs, especially breakthrough and sustainable creativity, and what we can each do to set ourselves up in situations so that we are able to light the creative genius that's in all of us. And 3, and this one truly was life-changing, and I'm sure you and so many of your listeners and guests have read it, The Richest Man in Babylon. Look, there's nothing like a good myth to tell you what you need to know in a metaphorical way that we can hear. And that book has the best myths I've ever heard, even better than the Greek ones.
Yeah, of the 3 that you mentioned, that one I have read. That's by George Clason, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree with you more. It is a great book with a really good message in it.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing those with us. Yeah. So, Scott, what areas do you want to move into next that push you to grow and reach your greatest potential?
I really am looking at, over time, creating a more formalized organizational structure within which people that are seeking to build a sense of self and purpose, and then go out into the world and change it accordingly, can find that. And so that's something I've been working on for the past 6 or 7 months, and I want to launch next year. I am always looking, though, to connect with more and more business owners that are also seeking that alignment, who are willing to step up to the base of Mount Olympus, start to charge their way up, because I want them to be at that tower on the mountain and lighten up the sky.
Beautiful. Where do you look for inspiration today?
Around me, everywhere. I love talking to people. I love listening to people. Every single time I talk to someone, I try and say, what is the light that they brought on to me? You've been my inspiration for the past hour or so. The person I was talking to earlier than that was my inspiration for the hour prior to that. And the woman at the gym this morning when I went there, who was tired but still managed to be there and have a smile on her face as she was taking my card, she was that inspiration in the moment. I honestly feel there's nothing better in the world than people. I love them. And I find inspiration with folks everywhere, even the most little thing.
Eyes wide open.
Totally. At least try.
I hear you. Yeah. So what are you most proud of?
I am the most proud of the fact that, considering where I came from, what my mindset was, and what could have been, that I was given the opportunity, the guidance, and the support to be able to make the sort of changes in my life that have led me to where I am. There's a friend of mine who I worked in government service with for many years. And when he retired after 35 years, he said, one of the things that I realized when I look back at my career is that nothing I did those entire 35 years matter. And I'm okay with that. That's maybe been okay for him, but I would view that for myself as a tragedy. And I feel lucky to have had some of the struggles that I had that pushed me in a different direction and have given me the opportunity to say with 100% certainty, in my own teeny tiny little way, what I've done matters.
Love it. So in the last conversation that we did have, we spoke about the masks that we wear.
Yes.
We all have a tendency to wear them. We wear them for a multitude of different reasons.
Yeah.
Hiding our fears,
yes.
Wearing a mask to show up the way that we think others expect us to show up.
Yeah.
Are you at a point today where you feel that you've removed all of those masks?
Really being honest, I think that that's an ongoing lifetime process. There are a zillion situations in which I will not remove a mask because I don't necessarily want to remove it. So for instance, if I just happen to be in a bad mood that day, or if I'm sick and it's not anyone else's problem, I'm going to put a mask on and try and bring the best face out into the world, because it's not the woman at the grocery store's issue that I had a bad day or that I couldn't find the cheese that I wanted that day and I'm mad about it. And so those masks I never really do want to leave behind, because it's just a matter of courtesy and respect to others. I do believe that I show up every day as authentically as I can. Are there days when it's not quite there? Are there areas where I might realize, you said earlier, we all have our blind spot. Working with coaches, with mentors, people like that can help rip those off. As I seek to continually surround myself with people that work with me on my own issues around that, which I would be a liar if I said I just have resolved completely and will never have again, right? Then we discover masks we may not even realize we're wearing. And who knows where my own journey towards my own purpose might be. I mean, I feel my purpose and what it is now, as you said, you do, and it comes through when I listen to you. But 10 years from now, that may shift and change, and we may realize we were gradually building up a mask that also needs to be torn down. I'm open to that as well. That's the beauty of evolving. That's the beauty of life. And you know what? As sad, quote unquote, sad or unfair or whatever as it might be, that it took people like us until our 50th, something or another, to figure out exactly what our purpose is. The beauty of it is we still have lots of time to continue to adjust it and remove new masks if we do build them up.
Absolutely. So, Scott, what message do you want to leave our audience with?
No matter what anyone believes you're capable of, no matter what anyone thinks that you can or can't do, or should or shouldn't do, no matter what you think you can or can't or should or shouldn't do, what is possible is within. It may not be everything. I'm never going to be a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, no matter how much I think that anything might be possible. But the ability to be fully who and what we are is always within. If you're losing touch with it, it's possible to recover that. And that's, I think, what I would like folks to hear and really absorb and understand and believe for themselves and their futures.
Thank you. Appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
So before I ask my final question to you, where can our audience go to engage with you?
www.speakerscott.com. I'm also on Instagram, s.scott_mason, and on LinkedIn, s.scott_mason. And I would love to hear from folks.
Perfect.
I love meeting people.
Well, we will make sure that we link to those in the show notes.
Thank you.
So here's my final question to you. On a scale of 0 to 100, with 100 being fully realized potential, where is Scott Mason today?
I would say 88.
88.
Yeah, very specific, right? I don't know why I just pulled that number out. So I feel like I have tapped in to who and what I am. I feel as though I know my mission and I understand it. And based on the way my professional life is going, the way people seem to be responding to me, I know I'm on the right path. But is it fully realized yet? In some respects, I think that part of the story is just beginning. And that's a lot of why I'm so excited every morning.
Love that. Well, I'm going to ask you then to briefly tell us what obstacles or skills, if any, are holding you back then from becoming that best version and reaching your full potential?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I would say the biggest obstacle is within my own mind. One thing that I am actively working on is, and I've gotten a lot better at it, but this is going to be a really hard one for me, is making sure that I don't slip into a victim mindset. You know, being biracial, raised by African Americans, being adopted, right, being gay, facing discrimination and various other challenges that are associated with those things. It can be very easy to feel just put upon. The problem with that is, in a way, it's giving larger scale social oppression agency and taking power away. And that's one of the most insidious things about discrimination and social inequality, is that people can develop a mindset that makes taking their own power away surprisingly easy because they're doing it voluntarily. Victim mentality is one that allows you to comfortably do that. I've come a long way from the days where I was angry a lot because I felt like I had been unfairly mistreated or deprived of opportunity or discounted or dismissed because of X, Y, Z. Come a long way. But those things can be so ingrained and insidious that unless I'm constantly on the lookout, I can easily, particularly if I'm feeling very vulnerable or not willing to face something that I did that needed to change or deficiency or flaw in me, look to see those things as just, poor me, I'm having to endure this. Anytime that sort of mindset creeps in, I'm losing my agency. I'm not able to fulfill my potential. In order for us to really be everything that's possible, we also have to accept the full scope of agency that we have. That is something I work on.
Thank you. The self-awareness that you brought up earlier will certainly be a great tool for you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So thank you, Scott, so much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I appreciate you being candid, sharing of your experience and your knowledge and your insights with our audience. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for having me. And tough questions. I loved every one of them.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you. And for all of you, thank you very much for watching. And if you found value in this episode, please like and share with your friends, and be sure to subscribe to this channel. And until next time, stay healthy and optimistic. Keep learning and growing. And remember, the transformative change in your life and business always begins with you. And nothing happens until you take action. And we'll see you on the next episode of Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care.